most common mistake I see is people telling people way too much way too soon and then regretting it. And so I always say, you can always tell, you can never untell. If you let the cat out of the bag, can you ever get it back in the bag?
Welcome to The Details with Allison Kahler, a space for real divorce stories and grounded conversations with experts, helping you find clarity and courage as you step into a future that may look different than you expected and better than you thought possible. My guest today is Oona Metz. Oona is a therapist with over 30 years of clinical experience and the author of Unhitched. Today, we talk about how to tell people about your divorce. That includes your inner circle of family and friends, your children if you're a parent, and everyone else in your life. We talk about how to handle some tricky situations and even what to do with your social media after you get divorced. Let's get into my conversation with Oona. Welcome to The Details, Oona.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here today.
So thrilled to have you here. And today we're going to dive into a really important topic, which is in the context of divorce or contemplating divorce, how do you start telling people about this? And that includes everybody in your life, friends, family, colleagues, kids. So as we dive in, what's important about this topic?
Oh, it's such a good topic. I'm so glad that we're going to be diving into it today. Telling somebody that you're getting divorced can be really fraught with emotion. And for most people, they have never done it before, right? Sometimes people get divorced twice, but for most people, the first time, it can be really challenging. So it's a good thing to think about. It's something you never think about unless you're faced with that situation, right?
Thinking about it, preparing for it intentionally, it sounds like what you talk about in your book is really important, because otherwise, what are some of the common mistakes that people make if they don't prepare for that?
I think the most common mistake that I see in my practice, I lead divorce support groups for women, and the most common mistake I see is people telling people way too much way too soon. And then regretting it. And so I always say, you can always tell, you can never untell. And I think that's especially true if somebody is betrayed or they're very angry at their spouse, that oftentimes they can want to kind of tell the world, how they've been wronged. And I really encourage people to slow down. Sometimes your emotions might be moving faster than your brain. And as I said, you can always tell, but it's very hard to take those words back once you've said them out loud. I think on the other hand, the other end of the spectrum, another mistake people make is, I'm not going to tell anybody at all. I'm too ashamed, or I'm too afraid, or I don't want to hear what people have to say. And I should be able to do this on my own. I'm just going to white-knuckle through the entire divorce by myself. And that's also a mistake that people make, because people need support. It's a hard thing to go through, and it's so important to have support. And in order to have support, you got to tell somebody what you're going through, right?
I'll actually use some of my personal experience here as maybe what not to do. And then you can help give us what would have been helpful instead. But I've been open in prior episodes that my divorce contemplation process was 2 to 3 years. And I fell
Not uncommon.
And I fell in the latter end of that spectrum that you mentioned, right? I kept things very tight to the vest for a while. I was with a therapist and a couples therapist, but I didn't really open up to my close friends and family. In fact, some of the earliest people I opened up to were some colleagues that I saw on a regular basis, but it felt almost safer to tell them because they didn't know me and my relationship well. Right. But I remember very distinctly the day that I told my parents, and I was headed to Thanksgiving to visit them, and I called them beforehand because the main heads up was hey, my soon-to-be ex-husband is not going to be coming on the flight with me. And it totally shocked them. And so if you use that as almost a case of how not to tell people, or what I could have done to open up a little bit sooner, what would be some of your advice as you start to think about opening up and telling people in your inner circle?
Well, it's interesting because I think we kind of have to divide this into the period where you're still deciding and
Yeah.
who you tell then, and the period where you've already decided and you've had a conversation with your ex about, or your soon to be ex about it. And because I think those are two different things. And one of the things that I see in my practice a lot is that women like you oftentimes do keep these kind of marital problems very private. And
Yeah.
some of that is because they may not be ready to admit it to family and friends who might have strong feelings. Sometimes it's kind of like, if you let the cat out of the bag, can you ever get it back in the bag, right? If you're
Yeah.
still working on your marriage or you're still hoping that things are going to be good, you may not want to say these things out loud to family and friends who are then going to they may, even if your marriage gets back on track, they might not get back on track, right?
Yeah.
Or you might feel some level of loyalty to your spouse that you keep your problems to yourself. But I think it's in that case, it can be good to find somebody like a therapist to at least so that you're airing some of these things out. But then I think once you've made the decision, that's a really important time to tell people. How do you think your parents would have reacted if you had told them 6 months earlier or something that you were really struggling with the decision? Like, there may be a reason that you decided not to tell them.
Yeah. I think it's a really good question. And what I would say is all of the fears and concerns that you just articulated were the ones that were swimming through my brain as I started thinking about telling people. What I will say in hindsight is that people responded so much, I don't know what the right word is to say, like better than I could have hoped. I think I underestimated the people in my life and how they could rise to the occasion. And as I've spoken with other people who've gone through divorce, I think that's one of the biggest themes that we've all said or shared is like, I wish I would have opened up to people sooner. And obviously, as you said, you need to be careful that you're not going to the flip side of the spectrum and airing it out to everyone. And then you can't put that back in the, in the box. But I think I wish I would have opened up a little bit sooner. Because I think I would have felt more supported and less alone. And I think it would have maybe felt a little less shocking to all of us in that moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think there is a way in which telling somebody else about it is also really admitting it to yourself.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people aren't really ready to admit how bad things have gotten. You said you thought about it for 2 to 3 years, and that's very, very common. Like, I think, especially for women, they think about it for a long time before actually making the decision. And so there is something about it really admitting to yourself, if you're going to tell somebody else like how bad it's gotten, and being prepared for whatever that person's response is going to be. Yeah.
I shared that in an earlier solo episode just about my contemplation journey of how the indecision phase almost felt like safer because it's like, even though it felt painful in its own way, saying it out loud and making the wrong decision felt scarier than being stuck in that indecision phase. Yeah.
Once you make the decision, there's a lot of unknown, right? Like, even if you're stuck in this kind of place that it's not that fun, at least it's familiar. You kind of know it. Right.
The devil you know versus the devil you don't, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say once you've gotten to that decision point and you're ready to open up with people, you have in your book this sense of like concentric circles, like a diagram of a ring. So how do you guide individuals as they're thinking about this process and starting to open up to people about it?
Yeah, so I really encourage people that when they're thinking about telling the people around them that they're getting divorced, that they don't have to tell everybody the same story, nor should they tell everybody the same story. And sometimes people kind of think in that shell-shocked moment, like, oh my God, I have to tell everybody the whole story, or I can only tell the one-sentence version to everybody. But so I really think it's important to think through, like, who are your circle of people and who do you trust the most with your most personal things? There's so many other people too in your life, people who maybe not are untrustworthy, but you have no idea. You don't want to try, it's like, oh, the guy at the post office where you're buying your stamps or the coffee barista or whatever, and you don't have to tell those people the whole story, but things do come up, especially if you have kids. Other parents could ask you, or your colleagues could say, how's your husband doing, or how's your wife doing, or they ask innocently, right? And so you have to have something at the ready. So I do encourage people to kind of have a little bit of a script ready to go for the people who they're not so close to, and to really divide the people they know into 3 different categories of people that you're really going to tell the whole story to, people you'll tell a bit of the story to, and people who you say, oh, I've gotten divorced, or I'm going through a divorce, but I'm fine. Wow, I really like your shirt. Where'd you get that shirt? I encourage people to, if they're answering the question and they don't want to talk about it anymore, to really pivot the conversation very quickly so that it kind of it's like a nonverbal cue of, I don't want to talk about this anymore, without being rude and saying, I'm getting divorced, but I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Right.
Instead, you say, I'm getting divorced, I'm doing fine, and do you guys have any vacation plans this summer?
Yeah.
So you just pivot.
And I think you have some vignettes in your book that share kind of, I think, fictional examples, but based on some of the individuals you've worked with. And I think there's a nosy boss in one of the examples that you share that's like, despite the attempt to pivot, still like tries to dig back in.
Right. And the employee keeps saying, well, I'm really looking forward to that meeting we're having on Friday.
Yeah.
And the boss keeps saying, but I thought, blah, 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 and she doesn't want to say. So just has to keep practicing that little one-liner that you have for the people that you don't want to open up to. Yeah.
So let's talk about a few situations where this might come up kind of with adults. And then I know you have a whole section in here about like how to tell children too. So I want to get to that in a second as well. But when you are in a work context in particular, or maybe in that, not the tight inner circle, but that next circle of folks, whether it's colleagues or other parents at schools, what are some things that might be helpful in coming up with that script? Like, how do you decide what to disclose, what to hold back as you're having that part of the conversation?
I think it's really a very individual situation and really case by case. You can just decide what you want to say and how vague you want to be about it, and kind of what elements of the conversation do you want to have. Sometimes I've seen at work, the conversation can also come up because somebody changes their name. And that can be hard sometimes, because if you work for a large company and you change your name, some people might assume that you've gotten married and congratulate you on your marriage, when actually you're getting divorced. And maybe you need congratulations from your divorce, but maybe you are not feeling that way. And so I've also had, sometimes I've advised people, if they have, like, say they have a large team at work and they don't feel like going through and telling every single person, to elect one person to send an email that they approve of. Or sometimes the person themselves sends an email and says, I just want to let everybody know I'm going through a divorce, I'm doing okay, and I would prefer not to talk about it at work. Or feel free to ask me questions if you have them, or whatever the message is that you want to send. Sometimes that can be done through a third party, or just for a large group through an email. And sometimes people do it on social media. Sometimes people do it on their holiday cards.
I've never seen that before. What goes on the holiday card in that situation?
Well, sometimes people will say our family of 4 has become a family of 3, with a picture of mom and 2 kids and no spouse on the card anymore. Or here's our new address. Sometimes people can do it just very subtly, like we've moved, and just list one parent and the kids, or just one adult. I've moved. So, there's a lot of different things to think about with this. Yeah.
Your example of somebody mistaking the divorce and name change as a marriage happened to me. I was in consulting and one of my clients that I was working with noticed my name change. Was like, "Oh, congratulations. Did you get married?" And I was like, at first I was like, "We've been working together for a while." And this was pre-COVID. This was in person. I was like, "Did you not notice I had a ring on my hand before and I now don't have a ring when you..." So anyway, it was a little bit awkward, but I'm curious, what are some of we were talking a little bit about this before we hopped on the call, but just what are some of the responses that sometimes people have that are probably well-intentioned, but maybe put you in a tough position to be ready for? So what are some of the responses that are helpful to be prepared for?
Great question. I think in our society, we have really good, solid kind of traditions when somebody dies, right? When somebody's grieving, whether we follow them or not, we know what we're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to send a card. You're supposed to say, "I'm so sorry for your loss." You're supposed to attend a funeral or a wake, or maybe send some flowers or a lasagna or a hot dish, as they say in the Midwest, I learned. But I think with divorce, those traditions are not so set in stone. And so I think a lot of times people don't know what to say. And I recently wrote an article, you can look it up, it's on WBUR on Cognoscenti, and the title of it was "Congratulations or Condolences, What to Say When Your Friend Gets Divorced." And the long and short of it is, the answer is, it really depends, And divorce is not a single moment in time. It's oftentimes an evolution that lasts for many, many months or even years. And so when somebody first tells you that they're getting divorced, depending on their situation, the appropriate response might be, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." And years later, when they finally get all the legal paperwork done, or many months later, the response might be, "Oh, congratulations, you got it done," or "I'm proud of you." So I think the answer to that question is it depends, and you really have to listen and ask the person how they're feeling about it. I think we also have to be careful of not doing the overly soupy kind of like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry to hear about that." And, "Oh, how are your kids?" Which kind of implies that you've done this terrible thing to your children and that your life is over. And while I think divorce is such an incredibly hard and stressful and heartbreaking thing to go through, it doesn't end people's lives, and people do come out of it on the other side and oftentimes really feel so much better. And so it's not the end of a life or of happiness.
I think there's two other archetypes as I think about the responses that I got through my divorce or other people got. One we talked a little bit about before, but it's kind of like the nosy person that wants all the details and is asking questions, like the gossipy person, right? And I think they're your earlier guidance of how to pivot the conversation or try to, just
have a ready-made vague answer. Yep.
Exactly. Just to create some boundaries and protect yourself. And I've spoken to a few people about this, especially when they're parents. That's not helpful is, "Well, he's such a fucking asshole. Good job, being done." Because I think, especially if that person is the parent to your children, it's like, I don't want you saying negative things about my child's parent, my co-parent. But even if you don't have parents, it automatically puts you in the position of then needing to defend them. It's like, I'm coming to you for support by telling you this. I don't need you shitting on the person that I'm regardless of the circumstances. So I'm curious, is that one that you see as well of having to defend against?
Definitely. And I'm happy to tell you a little story I'll tell on myself a little bit, which is that many, many years ago, I had a friend and she got married and then they had kids and our kids were the same age. And then they got divorced and they lived in both the parents lived in the same town and they were sharing custody of the kids. And so I would see her husband out and about at some points during child activities. And he had really not been a good character in their marriage and in their divorce. And so I was really kind of on her team, so to speak. So I thought to myself, well, the supportive thing to do if I see him is to totally ignore him and give him the silent treatment.
Yeah.
And I'm being such a good friend. I'm really upholding my loyalty to my friend. And I was so proud of myself that I went and told her this. And I said, I saw your ex in town, and I just want you to know I didn't even give him the time of day. I just totally ignored him. And she said to me, you know, he is the father of our kids. And yeah, he was a jerk to me. And I'm glad I'm not married to him. But like, I have to co-parent with him. And I don't want our kids to be, having their father getting the cold shoulder from people in town. Like, they don't know what happened. He didn't hurt them. He hurt me. Yeah. And it was very eye-opening for me. And I was like, oh, you are so right. Mm-hmm. I am so sorry. You are so right. And from now on, I will be cordial. And I'm not going to be friends with him. I don't have that interest. And she wasn't asking that. But I'll be cordial. I'll say hello. I'll say, how are the kids doing? And that's it. And that was such an important lesson for me,
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
To not make an assumption,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And based on that story or other things that you've seen in your practice, what would you want people to know? Not the people that are communicating, I'm getting divorced, but the people on the receiving end, to that point of like, there's not necessarily these implied protocols or traditions or etiquette around this. Like, what would you say are some of those things to be keeping in mind if you're on the receiving end of that
so
information?
Your friend. Yeah. I would say really important not to make assumptions. Also really important to ask your friend how they're doing and how they're feeling about it, rather than you just coming forward with your feelings.
Right.
I also think, like, sometimes people want to give you a lot of advice if you're getting divorced, and sometimes that advice can be helpful and sometimes not so helpful. So I think always ask people too if they want advice before you start giving advice. And definitely, like you were saying, it took you 2 or 3 years to decide to get divorced. Many people do take a long time to decide and are not talking about it publicly. And so once they do decide, and then they tell somebody, oh, we've decided to get divorced, or I've decided to get divorced, if the response is like, oh, but have you tried everything? Or, gosh, he seems like such a nice guy. Or maybe you should try some more. Or was it really that bad? Or those kinds of responses are really not helpful, because nobody makes this decision lightly or happily, right? Yeah. It's always a painful decision, because, it can be the right decision, absolutely, but it's still painful. Like, nobody gets married thinking someday I hope I'll get divorced, right?
Yeah. I think it's what you need on the other side can change day to day is something that I learned.
Yes.
And I feel really grateful that I have, a good support network in my life, and people acknowledged that or realized that. But like, on some days I wanted to vent and I just wanted someone to listen. On other days, I was really wrestling and I wanted a sounding board, maybe not straight advice, but sort of like, this is how I'm thinking about it. What do you think? And some days I wanted to just escape and wanted to do something totally not at all related to, because it can feel all consuming in some ways.
Yes. Right. You just want to break from it. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think, my one tip for people on the other side, and I had conversations with some of the people close to me about this, is like, maybe the best thing you can do is just ask me that day, like, what does support look like to you today? Right. Yep. To that point of not making any assumptions. So
absolutely. I think also, like, really for the divorced person to find other people who've been divorced or who are getting divorced, because I think there's so many well-meaning people in everybody's life but if they're not going through a divorce, they may not get it in the same way. Yeah. And I think one of the things I think about a lot is, and we talk about a lot in the support group that I run, is the way in which people can feel so nuanced during a divorce. So people come into my support group, and it's pretty common that they might say, like, I am so angry at my ex right now. They did X, Y, Z, and it really pissed me off. And on the other hand, I really also miss them.
Yeah.
And to have, like, to be able to hold those two things at the same time, I think is really nuanced. And I think
Yeah.
for somebody who hasn't gone through divorce, they might hear the first part of like, I'm so angry at my ex and get on that train. Yeah, me too, me too. And then,
Yeah.
but I really miss them. Well, why do you miss them? They're such a jerk, right?
Right.
To not be able to hold both of those things. The other thing, I actually talked about this today, that I talk about in my support groups is like the way in which it can feel hard when you're in the process of divorce and your ex is being a jerk, but the way that it can also feel hard if you're going through divorce and your ex is being kind, and that it can bring up feelings of longing or confusion, like, why are they being like that? Or why
Yeah.
couldn't they be like that all the time? Or should I go back with them? Or, so I
Yeah.
think those kinds of nuances are so important to be able to talk to somebody like a therapist or like another person who's going through divorce who could really understand it in the same
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
You mentioned this in the introduction to your book, and I read it, and I was like, I say this all the time too, but it's like the divorced club is one that
Yes.
nobody seeks to be a part of. But like once you are a part of it, it is like
Yep.
one of the fastest paths to friendship because regardless of the circumstances of the divorce, there's just something about having been through it and understanding all of those nuances that you've just talked about. And so I think what you're doing with these communities and groups is just so needed and so valuable in the world. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think women, once they get through it, they really also, so many of them want to give back,
yes.
and are like so happy to be supporting somebody else going through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. So let's talk a little bit about what it's like to tell kids.
Okay.
That was not part of my journey, but I know that can be a really challenging part for parents through this process. So talk to us a little bit about what that looks like.
Yeah. So again, case by case, people have different ages of kids or different kinds of situations that they're in. So none of these are like blanket, use this for every single
Yeah.
case. But I think there are some generalities that we can point to. I think people get very anxious about telling their kids because it's this big moment in time, and it's a conversation that everybody is going to dread, right? Like no one wants to tell their kids that they're getting divorced. And what I like to say is I encourage people to keep the first conversation short and sweet. Like I think people have this idea that they have to get everything out in the first conversation, and I remind them, you're going to be talking to your kids about the divorce many, many times over many, many years. So you don't have to say everything in the beginning, and really be careful not to make any promises other than the promise of we'll always be your parents and we'll always love you. Like those are two promises you can make.
Yeah.
Even if you think your divorce is amicable and you think that you're going to spend holidays together, for instance, don't promise that.
Yeah.
Because you just don't know, and you don't want to get into a situation where you're promising things out of guilt that you can't deliver on. And again, like divorce is not a single moment in time. There's evolution. So it might be very true in the moment when you tell your kids, we're going to spend every holiday together. But 6 months down the line might not be so true anymore. So,
yeah. I think that rings so true. I was just speaking with someone yesterday, and in your book, you talk about the different ways people get divorced if you initiate or if you're on the receiving end or if it's mutual. And I think you say in the book, like, even if the decision to divorce is mutual and somewhat amicable, once you get through the legal process, you can find that it can get a little bit trickier. So I think that makes a ton of sense in terms of, don't overpromise when you don't know what the future is going to look like. What's the nuance between older children and younger children? You talk a little bit about that in the book as well, but if you have adult kids, or I know a lot of individuals wait, and a lot of couples wait until the kids are 18 and they're going off to college. That's a different situation than if you have young kids growing up. So how do you handle that differently?
Right. I mean, in general, not always, but in general, older kids might be able to pick up on more of the details of what's going on in the family. And they're also able to hold time a little bit better. So if you say to a young kid, she said a 3-year-old, your daddy and I are getting divorced and we're going to move out at the end of the summer. They don't know what the end of the summer is. They don't even know what the end of the day is. They don't know how to hold time in that way. Whereas if it's somebody 17 or 16, they can understand what that means. So for little kids, I really recommend that you just tell them kind of pretty close to the time that there's going to be a change in housing. And for older kids too, like you don't want to tell older kids, we're going to get divorced in a year, right? Yeah. You want to tell them closer to the time, unless you suspect that they already know, or that there's like so much conflict between you, or, you know, if they've overheard things, or in that case, you don't want them to be carrying it themselves. You want to have a conversation with them about it, because all kids, they're going to wonder what's going to happen to me, you know, like, and that's appropriate. They are focused on themselves. And so when you tell them, they're not going to say, oh, well, Mom, how are you doing? They're going to say, well, can I still have my dog? And, you know, can we still have our PlayStation? Or I don't know what the new video games are, but are we still going to, I don't know what, you know, they want to know what's going to happen to them. They want to know where they're going to live. They're going to know where they're going to go to school. So as much as you can have the answers to those questions, I think that's important. And if you don't have the answers, but you still need to tell them, then you say to them, we're not sure if we're going to be able to stay in the house. We have to work out a lot of finances, but we will keep you posted. Every time we make a decision, we'll keep you posted, and we will always have your best interest in mind.
Yeah. What comes up for me as I hear you sharing that and some of the earlier pieces is just like how much intentionality and thought and sort of emotional regulation is important as you. Yeah. So what do you guide for people, not only just in the words that you're saying, but how to prepare for those things sort of emotionally going into them? Because it's a lot.
It is a lot. I mean, I really suggest that parents, as much as possible, are aligned on what they're going to say, and that they even like write out a script, not even a script that they're going to read necessarily, but like, let's figure out what the language is going to be. And I say to parents too, like, you don't want to dissolve in so many tears that you're out of control, and that your kid feels like out of control and like they have to take care of you. But also you don't have to present yourself as if you're a rock and you're happy about this either. Right. So it's okay if you are a little bit emotional. You want to try to keep yourself together a little bit, but you want to model that like, this is sad and we're going to be okay. So you also want to say to kids, like, and here's what we have put in place. You know, I'm going to be going to therapy, and, you know, so is your other dad or your other mom, or they're going to be going to therapy, or we have supports in place, and we're going to get you supports in place too.
So we've talked a little bit about what to say when you're contemplating divorce. We've talked about it once you've decided and you've started to open up with people. One of the last things is kind of like, once the divorce is done, right? What are the ways you almost without words tell the world, like not wearing a ring anymore, changing your social media. Like, so talk to us a little bit about some of those elements.
Or sending the holiday card.
Exactly.
For the first time. Right.
Yeah. So what are the things that people maybe don't anticipate of how to keep telling people? I know for me, one of the things was, I think like 3 years later, I was still struggling with Delta to change my frequent flyer program. Like, they still had my old married name on there. And I had to like this, for people that are going through the process, don't be surprised by this. Like hotel loyalty programs will ask for your freaking divorce decree. And I was like, why do you need to see this like legal paper? Like, I don't remember it being this hard when I got married and changed my name. So anyway, like, what are some of these things that might surprise people post-divorce, or how they navigate some of those decisions?
Yeah. And I do have a section in the book, in the very back of the book, about the 10 important things that you have to do after you've, all of that paperwork stuff, because people think like, oh, thank God I'm done done with the divorce. I'm done with all this
Yeah.
paperwork. But then there's still a lot of paperwork to do after
Yeah.
you're finished. And you have to, I mean, especially now with all of our kind of digital lives, there's so many, you have to change all your passwords and all your streaming services and all these kind of online apps that you have that might have been
Right.
shared. Yeah, your phone plan, your TV plan, your all, all the things. Yeah, yeah, it's a lot.
I think there was a piece of it even with social media, and maybe I'll share more about this in a future episode. But for me, some of that was also a gradual process. There was obviously the like pretty quick things of
Right.
changing my name and all of that. But there were things that I was maybe not emotionally ready to let go of yet, or things that weren't there. So like, like the question of like, what do you do with your wedding ring? What
Yes.
do you do with your wedding
wedding
dress
dress,
and the
your
photo
wedding
albums?
album.
Yeah.
Yep.
All
Yep.
those things. And also social media pictures. I think there was a sense of me that, like if I were to on day one of being post divorce going in and like deleting everything, it almost feels like this like erasure
Yeah.
of everything that's happened in the past. So is there anything that comes up in your community groups or others as people are thinking about that post divorce and
Yeah. I mean, when it comes up in my groups, what I really do is really give people permission to do whatever feels right to them.
Yeah.
Like, I really do not think there's a right and wrong answer. And some people are going to throw their ring in the river, right? And some people are going to sell it. And some
Yeah.
people are going to give it to one of their kids. And
Yeah.
some people are going to wear it on a different finger. Like, there's so many different options. But again, kind of, I don't think you need to rush into these decisions. So,
Yeah.
especially if it's like the heat of the moment and you're feeling, because again, there's certain things you can redo, but there's certain things you can't undo. If you
Yeah.
burn your wedding dress, you're not going to like go stitch it back together. And not
Yeah.
necessarily that you even need it, but you might want to donate it to somebody who is in need or, So I would say like, don't do anything too quickly. And, you can put things away. You can put your wedding album away in the attic for a while until you decide what you
Yeah.
want to do for it. Sometimes people have a hard time getting rid of these things. And sometimes people are like, I want to get rid of it right away. But
Yeah.
I really give people permission to do whatever it is that's right for them and that there's so many options now. Some
Yeah.
people want to have a divorce party, or sometimes people want to have a divorce ring.
Yeah.
I made myself a beautiful divorce ring and engraved my kids' names on the inside, like it's, the new family.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I have a friend of mine who told me that one of the things she got, I think it was a Cartier bracelet, and it was a shape of a nail bent around. And I asked her what that represented. And she said, it's funny, I bought it as divorce jewelry for myself. And I told a friend, I was like, well, I guess that's the final nail in the coffin. And this friend said to her, no, it's because you're tough as nails to get through it.
I love that.
And
love that.
so whatever it is, some
Yeah.
sense of symbolic, gift to
I'm
yourself.
I'm also
Yeah.
seeing a lot of people get tattoos,
Yeah.
divorce tattoos. Yeah, yeah.
What's an example of a divorce tattoo or what somebody actually puts on themselves? Like, is it words? Is it a symbol?
Sometimes it's a symbol, a lot of like, birds in flight or butterfly,
Yeah.
something that kind of symbolizes change or freedom, or words, freedom sometimes, or love myself or trust myself or yeah. So
I love
it's
that.
pretty cool.
Well, as we wrap up our conversation here today, what do you hope people take away on this topic of telling people about divorce?
I think it's really heavy to try to bear all of this by yourself. And so I do hope that if you're in the process, you'll find at least one trusted person that you can talk to as if you're contemplating, whether it's a therapist or a best friend or a family member. And then when you're going through it, I also hope you can find people to tell who will be your ally and be part of your team because you deserve to have a team. Nobody deserves to go through something like this by themselves. So figure out who those people are and give them a call. And I'm guessing that they're going to be happy to hear from you.
And I'll just say on that point of don't underestimate the people in your life. You might be more afraid to tell them, but I have found that people have really risen to the occasion when I've let people there. So, Oona, thank you so much for being with us today. It was wonderful to dive into this topic with you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun talking to you about this.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Oona. I highly recommend you pick up a copy of her book, Unhitched. It's a fantastic resource for every phase of the divorce journey. And if you're interested in more conversations like these, be sure to hit that follow or subscribe button, and we'll see you next week on The Details.